that looks like we have everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us tonight and sharing your time with us. My name is Emma Amos, and I am the Executive Director of the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida. It's great to see some new faces this evening, and some I know very well. The Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida seeks to build understanding and community with the many rich and diverse faiths in the region. And after hosting 12 virtual events over the last 2 years, we are thrilled that we will be holding our Interfaith Community Dinner and Awards on March 24th in person. I'll talk more about that event at the end of this evening's session. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones on mute unless you want to ask a question during the Q&A at the end of the session. We'll be recording the program and we'll have the speaker view for most of the recording. However, there will be times when we have the gallery view of everyone. So if you don't wish to be recorded, please take your video off. We're very excited to welcome Rabbi Romberg to join us tonight to speak about his research, his book, and his family. And I'd like to take a little time to thank our co-hosts and sponsors, board member Matt Hartley, who's the director of the UNF Interfaith Center at UNF, and student Lee Jordan is joining us. And at the end of Rabbi Romberg's book, Matt and Lee will have some questions for the Rabbi, and then we will open up to questions from the audience. You're most welcome to post any questions you have in the chat bar during Rabbi Romberg's presentation, and we can either read them out or you are welcome to speak to the rest of the audience at the end. Now I'll hand over to our co-host, Matt Hartley, who will introduce the UNF Interfaith Center. Thanks very much, Matt.
Thanks, Emma. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Hartley, Associate Director, leading the UNF Interfaith Center. My colleague, Kalila Jamal, who works with me, is on the call as well. Hey there, Kalila. We run the show at the Interfaith Center. We work with a lot of amazing students who plan and lead our events, which range from discussions to celebrations. And we're excited that they take some leadership in events like tonight. So I'm actually going to hand things over to Lee, and Lee is going to do a short introduction with a PowerPoint for you. So let me share the screen first and make sure it looks good. All right. And so Lee, why don't you go ahead and tell people about the Interfaith Center?
Hi, I'm Lee Jordan. I'm a board member of the UNF Jewish Student Union and an interfaith student leader. So the Interfaith Center at UNF promotes religious and non-religious diversity on campus. They have events that help you explore and embrace your identity, such as a chaplain program that lets students talk about spirituality and religion with professional staff, networking opportunities with like-minded community members, leadership opportunities for students who care deeply about diversity and inclusion, and meditative, reflective, and spiritual resources and guidance. So here at the Interfaith Center, we have conversations that honor identity, acknowledge difficulty, engage controversial topics, and inform. There are celebrations and observances that empower and inform students and the campus community. There's also student interfaith leadership and training opportunities, and an interfaith council with students, staff, and faculty. There's a resource center for staff and faculty looking for religious, spiritual, interfaith affinity groups on campus, and a reflection room for quiet prayer, reflection, and meditation. And that's something that I use quite a lot lately. Holiday and observance recognition through the interfaith social media and UNF calendar.
Thanks, Lee. Lee is one of our up-and-coming leaders who's been doing an amazing job since joining us this year. And right now, he and Jules, our JSU president, are planning an interfaith Shabbat to welcome the interfaith community into a Shabbat experience, a Friday night service and dinner together. So we're really excited about the work that they're doing. So That's who we are as the Interfaith Center, but we are here tonight to hear from our friend Rabbi Jack Romberg, who's been a great partner to us at UNF. We're very grateful for him. And so just to give you a little introduction to Jack before he takes over the show, Jack Romberg retired as the Rabbi of Temple Israel in Tallahassee, Florida in the summer of 2019. It was his second career. He intended to enter rabbinic school after graduating from the University of Pittsburgh in 1976 with a BA in history focusing on Germany, but he ended up helping his father with the family's furniture manufacturing business. In 1995, he decided to pursue that lifelong dream to become a rabbi, entering Hebrew Union College Jewish Institution of Religion in 1996, earning a master's degree and being ordained in 2001. Before entering, he had decided to write the book on his great uncle Richard Stern that we're going to hear about tonight. And as a rabbi, Rabbi Romberg was deeply involved in the general community interfaith programs, as well as nonpartisan community issues in Tallahassee. And I know we've got some Tallahassee people who are familiar with his work on this call. So I think that's probably enough, and we're going to get to hear a lot more from him. So Jack, it's all yours.
Okay, so I'm going to put a PowerPoint on the online here to show a lot of, well, not too many, but a number of photographs that will be what I talk about. Okay, just give me a minute here to get this. Okay, so this is, of course, the name of the book. I'm going to not hang on this too long. Here, this is the first photo that I want to show you. Take a guess of who that is. It's me as a 6-year-old little boy sitting on the knee of my great uncle, Richard Stern, the person I've written the book about. Now, that was in June of 1960, when we were living in Fairmont, West Virginia. And Uncle Richard, he used to love being with me. And then when my brothers were born, he used to live being with my brothers because he looked at us as his grandchildren, because he was the legal guardian who raised my dad in Germany and got him in 1939, got him and his mom, that is his own sister, Uncle Richard's sister, to America to escape the Nazis at that point. So the bulk of my impression of him as a little child was just about having fun. He was, he would be with us and he would take me on walks and tell me funny stories. And he was just a great person to be with. Like I said, like being my grandpa. Now, the first thing I learned about him and my dad was when I was about 8 years old. Dad was telling me how he had served in the Army. And then he told me that Uncle Richard also served in the American Army in World War II. And I was shocked because Uncle Richard never said anything about that. Dad, of course, he told me all of his stories of serving the American Army in World War II. Of course, he was a young guy, but Richard Stern, he was already 43 years old, and he volunteered for the American Army. And that's part of what happens in the book. So that was the first thing I learned about him when I was eight years old. That was different from him just being kind of like a grandpa. And what he ended up doing is winning the Silver Star and doing a very, very heroic thing in the American Army in World War II. And I give a lot of detail about that in the book, A Doorway to Heroism. But what we really have to see, and what I think is truly a doorway to heroism, is this. Now, what you're seeing here is April 1st of 1933. And what he was doing is standing in the doorway of his store because the Nazi Party and Hitler had taken over the government. They had been put into power on January 30th of 1933. And my dad has said and told me when I was younger how he and Uncle Richard and their family, once the Nazis took power on January 30th, on January 31st, they were actually looking at so many swastika flags hanging all over the place, and it made them rather scared. And then just maybe 2 months later, they got word that there was going to be the first official action against the Jewish people in Germany, which would be a boycott of all Jewish businesses, a boycott of Jewish doctors, of Jewish lawyers, and so forth. So Uncle Richard, apparently, he had decided that he had to stand up and protest against the Nazis. Now, he turned out to be the only one in Cologne, Germany, which was the second largest Jewish population in Germany. He was the only Jew to stand up against them. Now, this particular picture, I saw it for the first time when I was about 13 years old, just after actually Uncle Richard had died, because he died 6 months after my bar mitzvah. And I happened to see a book in which this picture was in, and the book was about the history of German Jews in Cologne, Germany. And I asked Dad about it, and he said, well, Uncle Richard was protesting then. And Dad then, later on in the 1980s, he actually started to go back to Germany, and he took this picture and gave it to somebody that he met there, Dieter Korbach, who was a teacher of German students in high school, and he would be teaching them about the Holocaust. And so Dad gave him this picture and a lot of information about Uncle Richard in the 1980s that he could teach about it as part of what was going on to the Jewish people. And Korbach actually then presented this photo to the Jewish museum that was being put together in Berlin, Germany. And they put this picture in the museum in Berlin. And back in 2012, when my wife and I went to Germany to be with a family member that we had just met a few months before, we went to the museum in Berlin, Germany. It was a Jewish museum that gives the whole history of the Jews in all of Germany from around the year 200, all the way up until about today. And when we got to the part of the museum in which the beginning of the Nazi Party's attacks against the Jews was being talked about within the museum, this picture was huge. And I couldn't stop staring at it. I basically would stare at it like with my mouth open. What's going on? And after about 10 minutes of my just staring at it, my wife said to me, I think we have to go on to the next part of the museum. We can't just stand here forever. But I was so shocked at what it looked like. But in any case, this picture is now part of at least 5 different museums all over Germany. And Richard Stern is somebody known fairly well in Germany. So I knew that I had to do research on Uncle Richard, especially about 5-6 years ago. I was able to finally get all of the documents that Dad had collected and the letters that Dad had collected. My dad had passed in 2008, and in 2017, my mom was about to sell her house. It was their house, and move to an apartment. And so she was going to throw out a whole bunch of stuff that Dad had put together. And I said, no, Mom, don't do that. I'll take it. I'll look at it, see what's there. And one of the things I found in one of those boxes was the albums of Dad's pictures of the family going all the way back to the early 20th century, as well as all of the letters that Uncle Richard had written and had things written to him, so many of his documents, and so much information about him. And so I realized in 2017 that I was going to write this book, that his story had to be told, and that I would have to go to Germany and do research on his history, as well as getting more research on German Jewish history. So this particular photo happens to be one that I had seen on my dad's wall in Dad's office for years and years and years. And it's the Villa Stern. It turned out that that is the house that Uncle Richard was born in 1899. So when I started to study the letters and documents, I realized that I would have to also go to the town of Weilerswist, the town that he was born in, when I would get to Germany. I did go to Weilerswist when I went to Germany in September of 2019, and that was my first stop, was in Weilerswist. And just before I met with the archivist of the town of Weilerswist, this is what I saw. The same house. The house had been built by the Stern family because they were very successful. But of course, it was taken over by another family after they moved to Cologne in 1908. And later on, it was changed, its name was changed from Villa Stern to the Haus Heskamp. So this house is now owned by Weilerswist, and they use it for teaching kids about how to be actors and dancers and so forth. And it was just a shock to me to see that house looking almost exactly the same as the photo I had seen in my dad's office for years and years. Now, this is a group of people that worked with me in Weilerswist. First of all, the one on my right-hand side with the red hair, that is Dagmar Theisen. She was the archivist for Weilerswist that had organized things for me when I had gotten in touch with her by email before I got to Germany. The person standing on my other side is Anne Romberg, actually a cousin of mine who was born in 1948, who lives in Germany. And she has helped me do research in Germany going back to when I was interviewing people in 2013. And we met in 2012 and we became very close. And she was very interested in helping me do the research and to do the interpretation for when I would be working with people. And then the person right next to Anne, that is Helene Curtin and her husband. And Helene had written a book about the German Jews who lived in Weilerswist, Freischheim, and Erfstadt. Those are three towns that are smaller, that are now about 30 to 40-minute drive from Cologne, Germany. And she wrote a book about the Jewish community that was built in that area, going all the way back to the early 19th century. And in fact, from her and from Dagmar, I got a bunch of information about the Stern family, my family, going all the way back to 1793. And Seligman Stern was the first Stern family member who lived in this area. And he created so much in this area. He created the synagogue there. He created the cemetery for Jewish funerals in that area. And he did so much teaching to Jewish kids of all kinds of things. So it was very, very interesting to get all this information from both Dagmar and Helene. This is just a short example of the family setup that I had gotten back then, starting with Seligman Stern, and basically you can see Richard Stern at the end. And it was just basically his his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. This shows what it is that Seligman Stern built. He built his home, and the blueprint piece is of the synagogue that he built in Freisheim for the whole area. And the synagogue, of course, was destroyed in 1938, as almost every synagogue in Germany was destroyed during Kristallnacht, Crystal Night. And when I went to see the town, I saw this house, and they showed me exactly right next to the house where the synagogue had been built and where it was. Well, Dagmar and Helene wanted to change the name of the house from Haus Heskamp back to Villa Stern, and they proposed it to the organization, running the board running Weilerswist, and they decided they could not do it. So, meaning that the board would not do it, but they put up a special plaque honoring Richard Stern. So this is a copy of the plaque honoring Richard Stern. Now, the very next day, after spending that day in Weilerswist and getting all that information, I knew that I would begin to do days of studying and days of research in Cologne, Germany. And the first place that I went to was a museum called Eldehaus, the Eldehaus Museum. That is a museum that gives the history of the Nazi Party in Cologne, Germany. And the building that they actually have the museum in is a building that had been used in the 30s and into the 40s as a prison by the Gestapo of the Hitler's party, of the Nazi Party. But they have made it into a museum, and the woman standing next to me there, that is Berthe Klarzak. Berthe Klarzak is a very, very incredibly good historian. She's one of the people that runs the museum, and she took me all around, and she took me to the part of the museum that actually shows things about Jewish people. Well, of course, up here, you can see the picture, the photo that I showed you earlier about Richard Stern standing in the doorway of his store, protesting against the Nazis. Now, you can see also that there was an SA soldier standing next to him. Now, the SA soldier is not a real soldier, but it was a group of young guys that were supporters of the Nazis that wanted to be soldiers. Richard Stern was wearing his Iron Cross that he had won in World War I as a hero for the German army. So unlike so many people, he was a hero for the German army in World War I and actually became a hero for the American army in World War II. But here he was standing in the doorway of his store wearing his Iron Cross because he felt that as a hero of the German army, he could stand up against the Nazi Party. And what shocked me was right next to the picture, you can see a pamphlet. And I have had that pamphlet for years and years and years, because that pamphlet is what Uncle Richard printed to give out to people coming by his store during the protest. And it is that pamphlet not only condemns Hitler and the Nazi Party, but says that they should not be doing this against the Jewish people because so many Jews were war veterans. And in fact, 12,000 Jews had died during World War I. So I knew, of course, the picture of Uncle Richard, and I knew, of course, the pamphlet that he wrote. But now there's another picture right behind Berthe's head in this picture, in this photo. That picture is one of two Jews who had been taken prisoners by the Nazi Party on the same day, on April 1st of 1933, and were forced to hold signs and march with signs with the Nazi soldiers around them. Then those signs were saying to the German people, now you should never buy anything from a Jewish store. You should boycott the Jews. Well, the two Jews who were captured and made to march there and are in that picture, I didn't know this until a couple days later when I met somebody. And the two Jews in that picture are cousins of Uncle Richard's. So two parts of the family are involved in the pictures of this, of this boycott that happened on April 1st of 1933. Uncle Richard, the only protester in Germany, and two of his cousins who were prisoners and forced to do this for the Nazi Party. A terrible, terrible way for them to have to be. But again, the museum makes a hero of Richard Stern because he stood up for the boycott, and not just because of his standing up for the Jewish people. He also was very active in the Social Democratic Party. And he was a believer, and in fact, he said this to this family, that he was a believer in the civil rights of all Germans, that German people should have the civil rights that was in the Weimar Republic, the more democratic republic that was created after World War I, and that the Nazis were about to destroy by their governing of Germany. Here's the next picture. Oh, sorry, this is the next picture. This is the largest synagogue that was in Cologne, Germany, the Runstrasse Synagogue. And it was the synagogue that my family, that the Stern family, were members of for decades. And Dad, at 15 years old, the day after Kristallnacht, he was one of the teens that was forced to do the cleaning up of the damage and the destruction of Runstrasse Synagogue. Now, Runstrasse Synagogue has been completely rebuilt. It was rebuilt in the 50s. And it is now, of course, looks almost exactly the same as this. And it is the biggest synagogue again in Cologne, Germany. And it is a place in which a lot of people that come to tour Jewish things in Cologne, Germany, it's one of the places that people come and tour, as well as the synagogue for people to come and worship in and take part in holidays in and so forth. So before I went to Germany in September of 2019, I emailed a woman in the synagogue that I saw was in charge of information and tours. And she emailed back to me within about 3 minutes of when I commented her and expressed how she wanted to talk to me about Richard Stern. So that's the woman I just talked about, and her name is Esther Bugeva. And you can see that she's standing right next to Uncle Richard's picture as a protester in his doorway. And that is one of the first things you see when you actually walk into the Runstrasse Synagogue, is you see his picture. So again, she wanted to talk to me about his history, and she was shocked also that there was a living family member of Richard Stern. They had information, they have the picture up, but they had no idea that there were any family members left alive. So of course, she did a lot of work for me, as well as Esther Bugeva, and both of them wanted the book as soon as I had it done. So she sent me this picture right after she got the book a few months ago. Now, this is a picture of a page from something very important that I had in the documents that Dad had kept. This is from the service booklet of Richard Stern from World War I. And this page lists every battle that he was part of, and it also lists that he was given the Iron Cross. And he was given the Iron Cross on August 22nd of 1918, literally just a few months before the end of the war. Unlike his older brother, Heinrich Stern volunteered for the German army on August the 4th of 1914, because on August the 4th of 1914, Kaiser Wilhelm made an announcement how Jews had to be treated properly and had to be treated equally to everybody else, because everybody was needed to support in a patriotic way the Germans. So a group of Jews volunteered that day that Kaiser Wilhelm made that, volunteered for the German army. Well, Richard Stern, Uncle Richard, was drafted in 1917, June of 1917. And yet, despite the fact that everybody in Germany pretty much knew that the German army was going to lose the war at that point, Uncle Richard still did heroic things and got the medal. These are pictures that were part of a frame that had been up in my offices for years. After I was ordained to be a rabbi, my dad put together a frame with the pictures that I'm going to be showing you now. So the picture on the one side of him in the German army as an 18-year-old in the summer of 1917. And so that's him in the German army. And then the other one is Uncle Richard in the American army. And you can see that he was a sergeant at that point. He was promoted to be a sergeant because of the medal that he won as a Silver Star winner. Now, what he did is, well, what these pictures show are the certificates. The one is the certificate from the German army for his Iron Cross in 1918. And the other is the actual Silver Star, along with a letter written by General Mark Clark, who was the second in command of the American Army in Europe, second command to General Eisenhower, who, Eisenhower became president of the United States in the 50s. But General Mark Clark, he wrote the letter to Richard Stern, to Uncle Richard, and gave him the Silver Star. And I have to quickly tell the story about how I really found out about the Silver Star. When I was 8, Dad and I were on a vacation together. And as we were driving, Dad was telling me the story of Uncle Richard getting the Silver Star. And that was the first time I'd ever heard about it. And then a few weeks later, I was visiting Uncle Richard at his home. And I ran into his home and I shouted, Uncle Richard, where's your Silver Star? And he took me to the back bedroom where his office was, and he opened up the bottom drawer of his desk, and he pulled out a box, and that had the Silver Star. And he held it to me, and gave it to me, to hold. And he said to me, Jackie, when you're older, if you want the Silver Star, you can have it. He never displayed it. He just kept it in the drawer. And later on, when I was ordained, Dad had the Silver Star and he made sure that I got it. Now, these pictures are 2 pictures from the end of Uncle Richard's time in World War II. The picture with all the dead bodies, that is a picture from Dachau, the concentration camp that Richard Stern's division liberated in the very end of April 1945. And he sent this picture to my dad, who was in another division in the American Army, and to his family members back in New York. And in the letters that he sent to them, and to my dad in particular, saying, look at what's happened, look at what the Nazis did. And we have to always remember why we went against the Nazis and why we fought against them. We have to remember that. The other picture is a picture actually that Esther Bugeva sent me. This is Uncle Richard's house and store and what it looked like at the end of World War II. The bombing that destroyed it was from the American military, not something that was done by the Germans. And Uncle Richard saw it this way when he went into Cologne in May of 1945 to see what he could find about any of his family members, if they were still alive or not. And one of the things that he learned was that his older brother, Heinrich Stern, who had fled Germany into Belgium, he actually had been taken by the Nazis to Auschwitz, along with his wife and his daughter, and the three of them were killed in Auschwitz by the Nazis. Well, that's everything. That is everything from the PowerPoint. So you can actually take this off, unshare this now. Okay, Matt?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. And now we could all take a look at each other, and I'm willing to take any questions. Let me just summarize that this story, which, if I put it this way, is very, very unusual. In World War I, he was one of the Jews who fought for the German army and was decorated by the German army. In the 20s, he was a very successful businessman, very active in the Social Democratic Party, and noticed the rise of the Nazi Party, especially in the early 30s. In 1933, he was one of the few protesters against the Nazis. And he made it through the rest of the 1930s, got to the United States in 1939, just a couple months before the war began, because the war began, World War II began on September 1st of 1939. And in 1942, at age 43 years old, he volunteered for the American Army and became a hero for the American Army. And one of the things that I have are the newspaper articles written about him as a hero for the American Army. He was also played by a very famous actor on the radio who played him as a hero for the American Army in a radio show. Open for any questions.
Thank you so much, Jack. I saw we already have a question from Parvez in the chat. So Parvez, will let you ask. You want to ask that first, Parvez?
Yeah, I can ask. So Jack, it's a remarkable story, and thanks for sharing it with the world. You know, listening to the story and viewing those pictures, the first thought that came to my mind is how proximate we are to fascism. We're just a generation removed from fascism. And it seems like with democracy kind of on a backward march, both at home and abroad, the specter of fascism rising again is no longer hyperbolic. It seems to me it's very real again. And it's just a generation, and it's how quickly history has been forgotten, its lessons have been discarded, and we are marching towards again the beginning of that circle.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Not unusual Parvez, that I would agree with you 100% on something. we have that habit. And what I would say is, number one is, if you read chapter 5 of the book, it lists a number of things that Hitler did as a politician before he even got into office, that somebody right here in the development that I live at, who has the book, he came up to me and he said, when I read what Hitler did in 1933, well, in 1931, 32, 33, how he handled politics, it made me think that we just went through this, that we've had people handling politics the way that Hitler, had handled politics. I'll give you another example of something that hit me. And Parvez, of course, what happened to my mom in November. But a year ago, on January 6th, I was actually working on my book and wasn't seeing on TV about, the riots going on in Washington, D.C. Mom called me and she said, Jack, do you know what's going on? I said, no, what's going on? And she explained to me what was happening. And then she said, that your dad died in 2008, and I miss him terribly, but I'm glad he doesn't have to see what's going on now, because he would feel that he's back in Nazi Germany.
It's very sobering. So I want to throw it to Lee Jordan next. And then if anyone wants to drop questions in the chat, if you don't want to pose them out loud, we'll be glad to read those off. And then after Lee's question, also anyone who wants to jump in can just unmute and pose a question. So Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, for sharing your uncle's story. I think that the way that your family's history is intertwined with Jewish history and world history is just incredible. I would ask, what lesson do you think your Uncle Richard offers for Jewish people and communities today?
Well, the number one thing that he offers by his experience, and it's something that he actually even wrote to my dad in letters as they were both in the army, and I see the letters, is that you cannot think of just yourself. You have to think of other people, and you have to look at what's good for other people. And frankly, that's a very, very important part of Judaism, is the caring, not just for yourself, but for the community, and caring for other people. And it doesn't show, there's nothing in the Torah that shows a particular political position in terms of that you solve a problem by doing it this way or that way. It shows that you have to care about solving these problems that affect other people. And it used to be that it didn't matter if you were liberal or conservative, you used to be able to talk to each other and figure out how you're going to solve the problem. Is it going to be more conservative or is it going to be more liberal? And today, we're not in that position anymore. We're not in that position. So caring about other people and not putting your own spot as the only thing you worry about, that is a very important lesson that Uncle Richard's life should be teaching us. Especially look at what he did with the protesting. And then even though he was if you were reading the book, you would see that he had been in America. He had started working all over again, and he began as just a washer of dishes in restaurants, okay, while he was, learning to speak English. But he got himself moved up into a better position as he learned more and more. And he could have just kept making more and more money, but instead, he volunteered for the American Army because he knew he had to go against the Nazis. That you get in chapters 8, 9, and 10. Another question then? Lee, another question?
Anyone have any questions for Rabbi?
Actually, I do have a question. Thank you so much for sharing, Rabbi, and that history is amazing. I do have a question for you. It's obvious that most of us can't get the same richness and experience from 23andMe, but you were able to actually step back into your history and your heritage and relive some things or experience some things that Uncle Richard did. But I really want to know, it seems like Uncle Richard really shaped or helped shape your formative years, but how did he shape your thoughts and viewpoints in your adulthood, and actually maybe even your career choices, if he did?
Well, he didn't focus on that because he died, like I said, he died when I was 13 and a half, just 6 months after my bar mitzvah. And when he was with me, especially in my younger years, he just wanted to have fun with me, and he didn't lecture me on things. He just wanted me to have a good time. But there was a lot he taught Dad, and Dad kind of started to teach me about things. So I'm going to share a story about me when I was about 7 years old, and we were living in Fairmont, West Virginia, like I said before. And I said something. Dad heard that I had said something nasty about some African American, that I had heard. Actually, it was a song that somebody was singing, and I started singing it at home, and it was one that was insulting African Americans. And Dad pulled me aside on a Sunday morning. Instead of playing with me like he normally did early on a Sunday morning, he made me sit down. And he then told me, for the first time that I heard anything about this, he told me about what it was like to be a Jewish person in Germany and how people acted so awful against them. And he said to me, you cannot not do that to anybody. You have to understand that you have to respect everybody in this country and not do things in the wrong way for people who are minority, so it was just really that kind of thing that started to teach me. And when I was, by the time I was 13, actually I had rabbis telling me that I should become a rabbi, even as a kid. And Uncle Richard liked that. He liked the fact that I was interested in that. And, then of course, sadly, he died. And when he died, actually, I had visited him in the hospital about 2 days before he died. I didn't know he was going to die. But I knew that I was actually visiting my dad, who was having a minor thing in the hospital back in 1967. And Uncle Richard happened to be up, in a different floor in the hospital. And Mom said, do you want to go see Uncle Richard? I said, yeah. So when I walked into Uncle Richard's room, he saw me come in and he started to cry. And he just was crying that I came in to see him. And the reason he broke down is he knew that I admired him and he didn't want me to see him in such a bad situation.
Thank you.
And I would say that learning my family's history, not when I was 6, 7, 8, but as I got into high school and then college, that really kind of showed me how I should, what I should pursue as an adult.
Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
I have another question. So I haven't finished the book yet, but I've been reading it, and I found it really interesting the way that you intertwined your family's history with your personal experiences of Uncle Richard. And I was wondering how you decided to write the book like that and what that was like.
Well, I had such a good time with him as a little kid. And as you'll see, there's a lot of, good stories. And I decided when I was putting the book together that I just made a decision that it would make it more interesting for people if they could see the connection of some personal things to actually the historical things and the biography things. What I decided then was to put, some of my stories in chapters that connects them well to what's going on in that chapter. So for example, the story about Uncle Richard showing me the silver star, that happens to be in chapter 9, okay? Because that's the chapter that talks about him in World War II and winning the Silver Star. So I actually tell that story at the end of that chapter. And that's what made me decide to do that, was to connect things of his life to things that I experienced with him. And most of them are kind of funny. You'll see when you see.
Any other questions?
I have another question. So do you have any ideas on your next book or writing project?
I'm not quite sure what my next book for sure is going to be. Right now, I'm actually focusing on teaching and speaking. Just so you understand or know, there are organizations, some are congregations, some are just organizations that, and some are museums that are asking me to do teaching. So for example, one of the things I'm teaching is the history of German Jews. And back in 1812 was the first time that German Jews were let free, were emancipated. And that was in Prussia because that was before Germany was a full country with all of the German states put together. But even though they were emancipated, there were times in which they were doing well and being okay, and then times that they were being oppressed like crazy. So and we're not even talking about the Holocaust at this point. I'm talking about times in the 19th century and in the early 20th century before we even get to the Nazis taking power. And what I've learned, because I've also studied the history of African Americans, what I've learned is there are parallels, some really interesting parallels between the situations of Jews in Germany and African Americans in the United States. And an interesting connection is that, and I just finished reading the book, and I'm actually putting this together for a 4-session class that I'm going to be doing this summer for an organization down in Miami. One of the interesting connections is that by the end of 1933, Jews who were professors in universities and colleges in Germany were not allowed to teach anymore by the Nazis. And as they made it to the United States, a lot of them started working for Black colleges. And their history working in those Black colleges is fascinating. And the connections that they made with people trying to get segregation out, done, and have integration happen, so their what they experienced in Germany and how it had them act as professors in these colleges was just fascinating. So that's just one of the connections. Another connection is that the Nazi Party, especially Hitler himself, had gotten a lot of stuff, a lot of information about how Blacks in America were being mistreated. And for example, the awful, murdering of the 200 or some people, of African American in Oklahoma in the 1920s, and how they were being treated in general. And Hitler was thinking, if America can do this to African Americans, to Blacks, then we can do this to Jews. So there are connections. That, 50 years ago in high school and college, I wasn't thinking about, but in doing a lot of studying in the last, 20 years or so, learning a lot.
Rabbi, thank you so much. We are getting towards the end of our conversation. We certainly can entertain additional questions if anyone has one. I also had a thought about, today. It's interesting that today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that we intentionally planned this for this day for that reason. But it's interesting we would be looking at your book and hearing your story and Richard's story. And it reminded me of a couple of things. It reminded me, one of the things I learned was the difference between International Holocaust Remembrance Day and Yom HaShoah. Is that how you say?
Mm-hmm. Yom HaShoah, right?
Yom HaShoah, which is Yom HaShoah being the Jewish remembrance.
Correct.
And the International Holocaust Remembrance being the larger, which includes
correct
the Holocaust of Jewish people, but other people who were.
And I thought that's why you were actually doing this today.
It wasn't. So now we've learned something, and we'll remember this date.
Mm-hmm.
But it just made me think of how we're connected, right? Because that's part of the idea was that people didn't stand up for the Jewish people or for other people who were victims. And there's the famous quote from the Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, who said,
Mm-hmm.
First they came for the socialists, I didn't speak out. Then the trade unionists, then the Jews, I did not speak out. And then they came for me. So it just kind of reinforces to me this lesson of like, we need each other. We need to speak up for each other in this moment in time. No matter who we are, no matter our differences, we need to be together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do need to be together. Yeah. If we're going to find any way to save this country from going down the way, it looks like it might be going down, because what Parvez said is what I agree with in terms of worrying about where we're heading. We have to be together. We have to work together. And we can't fight over certain things. We have to just get together and push for what's morally correct. And what's morally correct is caring about the other people.
Thank you, Rabbi. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in our conversation. Thank you so much for your presentation, for your book. For those who are on the call, if you don't have a copy of the book yet, you can get it on Amazon. You can order it from your local bookshop, probably, if you want to go through a local bookstore. But please get a copy of Rabbi Jack's book, and it's an amazing story. So thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to pass things on now to Joey McKinnon, the board chair for the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida, to share a little bit about what's coming up for our organization.
Great. Thank you, Matt and Rabbi Romberg. It's just been a joy to hear this talk. I had hoped to make your talk at in Tallahassee a while back and couldn't get away. But I actually have a closing question for you that I think you'll appreciate. I feel very fortunate when I have good friends like you that write books, and I'm a big fan of signed books. So where can I come to your next book signing and get a personal autograph?
Good question. I'm not quite sure where. Well, I'm actually going to be giving a talk in person at Bat Yam, the synagogue Bat Yam right here in St. Augustine, and that'll be on Saturday night of February 19th. So if you want to come down, come on down, and I'll sign your book.
I may do that. I'm very particular about that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I know during COVID, it feels like it's been forever now. Your time for virtual meetings has probably been at a maximum, and your time is precious. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. And as Emma stated at the beginning of the call, we don't know quite what the future holds yet with whether we're going to be moving back to in-person events or virtual. That will largely depend on what COVID is doing, but we do look forward to our annual dinner that Emma will let us know a little bit more about in a moment, as we just close with a few Interfaith Center announcements. Speaking of announcements, I just want to share, we've over the past year, really, we've been a part of a program called Keep the Faith, Get Vaccinated. And it's a campaign to build trust in the vaccine to protect ourselves. And so at all of our events, we've been closing with this announcement, and I just wanted to share it one more time. And that's, we are now experiencing the Omicron variant. Getting vaccinated is a hopeful act that protects you, your loved ones, and your neighbor. And remember, we're all taught to love our neighbor as ourselves and treat others as we wish to be treated. Getting vaccinated is an expression of that, getting boosted. And, I imagine a lot of folks on here are, if not everyone, but want to make sure we remember that our children ages 5 to 18 are now eligible to be vaccinated, and kids 12 to 18 are eligible to be boosted. And if those things happen, I think that we are hopefully rounding a corner, and these are the way this trial, this is the way that has been laid out for us to get through it. I do know that the Keep the Faith, Get Vaccinated campaign is starting to wrap up, and a couple of the organizers joined us on the call tonight. So I just want to briefly just give a shout out to Adwan Whitfield and Minister Rick Johnson out of Gainesville with Faith and Public Life that have just done tremendous work building trust in the vaccine in more rural counties like Alachua and Gadsden County. I've been working in Leon County and also right here in some underserved communities in Duval. And I just want to share a quick tidbit I heard the other day, and then we'll close with this. While many people are vaccinated, we still have a great deal of work to do here in Florida. Actually, in many communities of color, we lag far behind the national average of folks that are vaccinated. In fact, in the Black community, only about 40% of Floridians are vaccinated. And that's why it's just so important that we continue to share the good word about getting vaccinated, getting boosted, because it's a hopeful act, and it's an act of loving our neighbor and protecting ourselves. So thank you. And I just want to thank the organizers, Keep the Faith, Get Vaccinated, for working with us on this effort you've been doing. And I think you did tremendous work. So with that said, and hopefully, I think that hopefully in the end of March, we will be in a position where we can do our in-person annual dinner. And I think that I'm hopeful for that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Emma to share a little bit about that and how you can join us in March.
Thank you very much, Joey. A big thank you to Rabbi Romberg for his time and sharing his family's courageous story. Your uncle's strength and intolerance to injustice demonstrates what a remarkable man he was. I've just shared our web address and our Facebook handle I mentioned at the beginning that we're going to be hosting our Interfaith Community Dinner and Awards on March 24th. Our guest speaker is going to be Reverend Jennifer Butler, the CEO of Faith in Public Life, and she'll be speaking on the theme she explores in her book, Who Stole My Bible? Reclaiming Scripture as a Handbook for Resisting Tyranny. We'll also be presenting 3 awards for community education, mutual curiosity, and for an emerging leader. So if you know of any unsung local heroes that you would like to nominate for an award, please send me an email with their name and a short description of the great work that they have been doing in our community. We're going to take nominations until the 1st of February and then make our decisions. There'll be some interfaith entertainment, and registrations are now open for the 3-course dinner. So visit our website, listed in the chat, or our Facebook handle for more information. So once again, thank you very much for spending your evening with us. We appreciate you all, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you again.